The strange thing about working the night shift at a 24-hour diner is that you see the city in its worst state. The drunks, the insomniacs, the people running from a past they cannot bear or rushing headfirst into a new mistake. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, anyone who walks through that door carries a story with them, and none of those stories are ever happy. My name is Grace Turner, 26 years old, and I have been working as a waitress at Bernie's Diner on the south side of Chicago for the past 3 years. The job is far from glamorous, but it pays the rent for my tiny one-bedroom apartment and allows me to take online nursing classes during the day. It is a slow road toward a degree, but it is the path I chose, and I am determined to see it through. Tonight, or rather early this morning, the quiet feels eerie enough to raise the hairs on my arms. A few regulars drift in as usual, a truck driver sitting alone in a corner, an elderly couple whispering their arguments for nearly an hour over 2 untouched cups of cold coffee. The clock is creeping toward 4 in the morning, and I am counting every minute until the shift ends so I can walk the 6 blocks home and collapse onto my worn-out bed. Normally, I take the main streets where the lights are brighter, the security cameras more visible, and the sense of safety feels a little less fragile. But tonight I am exhausted, my mind fogged over like the steam rising from the coffee machine, so I choose a shortcut through the basement parking structure behind the old shopping strip. A foolish decision, the kind of decision you do not realize is foolish until it is far too late. I never imagined my life could tilt in an entirely different direction in the span of a few footsteps. But the moment I stepped onto the dim second level of that garage, everything began to slip off its familiar axis, and I had no idea what I was about to face. If you are still listening now, perhaps your heart has tightened the way mine did in that parking structure, in that moment when everything turned over in a single instant, because this story is only just beginning. If you feel your heartbeat quickening, if you find yourself wondering what will happen to Grace, then please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with anyone who loves stories that steal your breath yet leave you full of emotion. Every single follow from you becomes the strength that keeps us telling the next part. Not just one story, but an entire world waiting to be opened. And where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below with the name of your city, your state, or the country you are living in, so we can see just how far Grace's story has traveled. And who knows, you might be the next person with something of your own to tell. We are here, listening, and you, stay with us, because what comes next will be something you will not be able to turn away from. I quickened my pace, the sound of my footsteps echoing hollow against the empty concrete floor of the parking garage, the cold air slipping beneath the collar of my thin jacket and sending a shiver down my spine. The garage was unnervingly empty, the dim yellow glow of the flickering fluorescent lights trembling as if they too were weary from staying awake through the night with me. I was halfway across the level when I heard voices, men's voices, sharp and edged with anger, not just one, but 3, and one of them was trembling with fear in a way that made me stop in my tracks. I should have turned around, taken the long way, pretended I had never heard a thing, but curiosity, or perhaps the fog of exhaustion that slowed my thinking, kept me rooted where I stood. I moved quietly toward a large concrete pillar, sliding behind it and poking my head out just far enough to see. 3 men stood less than 20 meters from me. 2 of them wore dark overcoats, their presence calm and powerful. Every movement deliberate, as if they had been born to take command of whatever space they occupied. The 3rd man was the opposite. He was on his knees, hands raised, speaking rapidly in Italian. And even though I could not understand the words, I could read the desperation in his eyes. One of the men cut him off in English, his voice low and cold like steel drawn across ice. His appearance stole the breath from my chest, tall with broad shoulders, dark hair cut neatly, a tailored suit fitting him perfectly even in the dim, grimy light of the garage. He stood like a commander on a battlefield, needing no weapon to inspire fear. I could not see his face clearly, but the way he spoke each word sent a chill straight through me. He said, "You were warned twice. The third time is no longer my fault." His tone carried no emotion at all, as if he were reading a dinner menu rather than delivering a death sentence. The kneeling man suddenly pulled a gun from inside his coat, and my heart lurched. Everything that happened after unfolding so quickly it felt impossible. The tall man moved like wind, a single motion, clean and efficient, without one wasted beat. He turned, seized the gun, and immediately fired. The sound exploded harshly, a deafening crack that tore through the garage's silence and left a ringing in my ears. The man crumpled forward without a cry, without a struggle. He died right in front of me, and I did not even have time to turn away. It may have been a gasp, a short breath, or merely the faint scrape of my shoe against the concrete, but something made the tall man whip around. His eyes, now finally clear to me, were a deep, dark brown, cold and unyielding, locking onto me like a blade pressing into skin. I froze. My heart thundered painfully in my chest. The other man beside him said something in Italian, urgent, and I caught only two English words, witness and run. But the man who had fired the gun shook his head slowly. His voice was low and sure as he said, "She is mine. Go get the car. I will take care of this." That was the moment I truly ran. My shoes slipped across the cold, damp concrete as his footsteps followed behind me, quick, steady, relentless. He was chasing me. He was faster than I was. My breath tore at my throat, raw and burning, but I could not stop. The only thought pulsing through my mind was that I was going to die, that I would die in a parking garage just shy of 4 in the morning simply because I had been too tired to take the long way home. I burst out of the garage, my eyes searching desperately for hope along the empty street. But there were no cars, no people, nothing except a shadow racing toward me from behind. Then his hand clamped onto my shoulder and spun me around. I screamed or tried to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat. The man stood inches from me now, close enough that I could smell the faint hint of mint cologne on his shirt. He was not rough, yet he was not gentle either. His hands held my shoulders like iron, and his voice rose in that low, terrifying calm. "Listen to me, very carefully. The man I just killed pulled a gun first. I acted in self-defense. Do you understand? Self-defense. You saw he had a weapon. I reacted on instinct, and now you are a witness, which means I cannot let you leave." I remained standing there, my breath breaking in short, uneven bursts, my legs trembling beneath me as he stared at me without blinking. The icy early morning wind slipping through the empty street, yet leaving me numb to everything except the frantic pounding in my chest and the eyes of the man in front of me, cold, controlled, and dangerously calm. His hands were still on my shoulders, not squeezing, yet holding me firmly enough to stop any attempt at retreat. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice the same low sound I had heard in the garage, except now I stood close enough to feel the absolute steadiness in every word. I hesitated, then answered before I could stop myself, as if pulled by instinct. "Grace. Grace Turner." He gave a faint nod, his gaze never shifting away. "I am Lucas Romano." That name carried a strange familiarity, something I might have heard in late-night news broadcasts during lonely evenings in my small apartment. But in this moment it became frighteningly real. No longer a distant figure, but the man who had just taken a life before my eyes and was now standing in the middle of the street, keeping me in place with both his voice and his stare. A sleek black car rolled up, its headlights spilling gold onto the pavement. The man who had been with Lucas sat behind the wheel, glancing at me once without a word. Lucas tilted his head toward me, his tone softening, almost gentle if not for the steel beneath it. You have two choices, Grace. One is to get in the car. The other is for me to place you in the car. But no matter which one you choose, we are leaving together tonight. I shook my head and stepped back, my voice breaking apart as I stammered, I will not say anything. I did not see anything. I will forget it. I swear. Lucas followed, moving with a calmness that made it clear he was untouched by the fact I had witnessed a killing. It is not about whether you will talk, Grace. It is about what you have already seen, and that, whether you want it or not, makes you something I cannot walk away from. I glanced around, searching for anyone or anything that might help me, but the street remained empty, as if the world itself had gone silent to watch this strange confrontation unfold. Lucas did not wait any longer. He stepped closer, gently yet decisively, and when his hand rested on my back, I found myself unable to resist, not because I was overpowered, but because of a sudden, bewildering realization that if Lucas Romano had wanted to harm me, he would have done so already. I climbed into the car without a word. Inside, it was warm. The smooth black leather soft beneath my hands, the faint scent of mint lingering in the air. Lucas sat beside me, and the driver cast a brief look into the rearview mirror before starting the engine. We pulled away from the street as quietly as the darkness itself. No one spoke for the entire drive. I tried to guess where he was taking me, tried to recognize any familiar road, but everything blurred together in my exhausted mind. When the car entered a private underground garage and a security guard in a suit opened the gate without asking a single question, I understood that this was not a place I would be allowed to leave on my own. The elevator opened directly into a vast penthouse, walls of glass stretching from floor to ceiling and revealing the glittering skyline of Chicago. The space was modern, immaculate, and unsettlingly quiet. I stopped just past the doorway, unsure whether to step forward or run. Lucas walked in ahead of me, removing his coat and placing it casually over the back of a chair before turning to look at me. "This is my home. You are safe here." I let out a short, bitter laugh, my voice warped by fear, exhaustion, and shock. Safe is not exactly the word I would choose. Lucas moved toward me slowly, still carrying that same measured calm. "Grace, I do not kill for pleasure, and I did not bring you here to cause you harm. I did what I had to do. If I let you walk away, someone else would find you before I could protect you. You have no idea who the man you saw die was, but he had a brother, and his brother will not spare a witness. You are here not because I forced you, but because if you were anywhere else tonight, you would already be dead." I looked at him, unable to understand what kept me silent, perhaps the certainty in his voice, perhaps the strange realization that for the first time in my life, I did not have to worry about whether someone would believe me because he had believed me before I even spoke. I did not know who Lucas Romano truly was, or why fate had pulled me into this spiraling mess, but I knew one thing for certain, that from the moment I heard that gunshot, everything in my life had shifted, and I was no longer sure I would ever be able to return to the person I had been before. I remained rooted in the middle of that elegant living room, my legs feeling as if they had been planted into the cold wooden floor, my heartbeat thrashing wildly as my whole body braced for something dreadful, the only sound in the vast space, the soft hum of the air vents. Lucas had walked somewhere deeper into the enormous penthouse, leaving me alone with the panic rising in my stomach like an unseen tide. I turned slowly, unable to believe what I was seeing. The high ceiling, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights glittering beyond the glass like scattered stars, all of it too quiet, too perfect, too far removed from the world I had just come from. A world of blood and gunfire and death. And I, less than half an hour earlier, had been standing behind a coffee counter thinking about the anatomy test I had to take in the morning. A soft sound behind me made me whirl around. Lucas appeared, no longer in the button-down shirt from earlier, but in a simple black sweater, moving toward me with that same steady calm. I stepped back on instinct, clutching the strap of my bag as if it could protect me. "I cannot stay here," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of fear and exhaustion. "I cannot be locked away. I have things to do. I have classes. My mother calls me every Sunday morning, and if she does not hear from me, she will call the police." Lucas stopped, keeping enough distance not to overwhelm me. "Grace, no one is locking you up. The door is not locked. You are not tied down. You can walk out of here if you want. But if you do that, you will not live long enough to see tomorrow." I shook my head, refusing to accept any of it. "I am not involved. I do not know anyone. I have nothing for them to target." "Wrong," he said, his voice even and slow, as if he were pressing each word carefully into my mind. "You saw my face. You witnessed the death of someone tied to an organization. And even if I believe you will not speak, others, the ones who do not trust promises, will not think the same. To them, you are a risk, and a risk must be eliminated." I collapsed onto the cream leather sofa, trembling, the strength leaving my body as if someone had erased the blueprint of my life without asking permission, wiping away my classes, my job, my tiny apartment, the video calls with my mother, turning everything into something distant and unreachable. Lucas sat across from me, leaning forward with his hands clasped, his eyes no longer sharp as blades, but softer, tired. "I know this is more than anyone should be asked to endure. Believe me, I never intended to drag an innocent diner waitress into this because she took the wrong shortcut. But I saw you standing there, and if I saw you, others will too, and I will not allow that to happen." "Why?" I burst out, watching him with suspicion. "Why do you care? You do not even know who I am." Lucas was silent for a moment before replying, "Because once I let someone walk away without protecting her, and she died, and I will not make that mistake again." I did not ask anything further. Something in his voice kept me from pushing, a small fracture in that cold exterior revealing itself, and I was not ready to see what lay beneath. Lucas rose and walked toward the large glass door. "Your room is at the end of the left hallway. There are clothes, personal items, even a laptop if you need to study. If you want something to eat, tell me or Dominic, the man who was with me earlier. If you need to call your mother, I will arrange a safe call this weekend." I nodded before realizing I had done so. Lucas stepped into another room and closed the door, leaving me alone in a space that was too large, too quiet, and too unlike anything from my life. I sat there for a long time until my eyelids grew heavy, then stood and walked down the hallway to the room prepared for me. It was spotless, luxurious, the closet filled with clothes in my exact size, the bathroom gleaming like something from a five-star hotel. I stood before the mirror staring at myself, a simple diner waitress now trapped inside the world of people whose very presence could make an entire city tremble, and I wondered who I would be when tomorrow came. I woke in an unfamiliar room, the morning light seeping through the thick curtains and forcing me to take several seconds to remember I was no longer in my cramped apartment. The soft blanket, the faint scent of essential oils, the polished wooden floor, all too perfect. Too still, sending a chill up my spine. Everything from the night before had been real. I had truly witnessed a killing. I had truly been taken to Lucas Romano's penthouse, and I was truly being kept here, no matter what words he used to soften it. It was still a form of control I had not chosen. When I opened the door and stepped out, Dominic was already standing there, dressed sharply as if prepared for an early meeting. He nodded slightly when he saw me and handed me a steaming cup of coffee. "Lucas is waiting for you in the living room," he said. "There are a few things that need to be clarified." I walked slowly toward Lucas, who sat at a large wooden table by the window with a stack of papers and a fountain pen in his hand, as if he were writing a letter instead of commanding a world I could not begin to understand. When he saw me, he gestured for me to sit. "I do not want you to feel like a prisoner here," he began, "but for the safety of both of us, there are a few rules you need to follow." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I saw no other choice. Lucas handed me a sheet of paper, each line written neatly in his steady hand, every word clear to the point of coldness. 1. Do not leave the apartment without the permission of either me or Dominic. 2. Do not use your personal phone or social media. 3. Do not tell anyone what happened in the parking garage. 4. If any stranger comes near you, inform us immediately. 5. Always keep the key to your room with you. 6. If I tell you to hide, do it at once without asking questions. As I read those lines, it felt more like the rules of a holding facility than a luxury home. "I am not supposed to live here forever, right?" I asked without lifting my eyes from the page. Lucas gave a quiet shake of his head. "Only until I am certain they are no longer looking for you, when the threat is gone, or when they cease to be a threat at all." I did not ask who they were, unsure if I was ready for the answer. The days that followed drifted by in a strange mixture of luxury and tension. I had everything I needed: clothes, books, a laptop, food better than anything I had ever tasted, yet my freedom was confined within strict limits like a gilded cage. Whenever Lucas was gone, Dominic tracked my movements closely, and I could not decide whether he was guarding me or watching me. Every night I heard voices coming from Lucas's office, phone calls in Italian, his voice low and commanding. One night I leaned close to the door and caught only one sentence before Dominic found me. "If Marco thinks he can go near her, then he has never known who I am." That line repeated itself in my mind, raising more questions than answers. I began to doubt everything: Lucas's true intentions, the danger called Marco, the reason I could not leave, and yet something kept me there. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the fact that Lucas, despite his menace, had never once harmed me. Or perhaps it was the fleeting sadness I sometimes caught in his eyes, deeper than my own fear. And perhaps, in some hidden corner of me, I wanted to understand the man who had killed someone before my eyes, but still placed milk in my coffee each morning as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That evening, the rain began to fall, heavy drops striking the floor to ceiling windows with a steady, cold rhythm. I sat on the long sofa with an open book resting on my lap, unable to read a single line, while Lucas stood a few steps away holding a glass of red wine, his gaze not on me, but on the city blurred beneath the rain. The apartment was so silent I could hear my heartbeat. I did not know what pushed me to speak, perhaps the long stillness, perhaps the week of questions pressing against my throat. "You once said you did this because you did not want to repeat an old mistake, because someone had died." Lucas did not turn, but his voice deepened as though my words had touched a place he kept locked away. "Her name was Julia." A long silence stretched between us. I clenched my hands and waited. Lucas set his wine down, walked toward me, and took the seat across from mine. His face, stripped of its cold sharpness, softened into something so sorrowful it tightened my throat. "Julia was my former girlfriend. She did not belong to this world. Just like you, Grace. She was pulled in by accident. Because she loved me, she believed she could live among the darkness and still keep her light." He paused, staring down at his hands as if he still saw the stains that had never washed away. "I thought I could protect her. I sent her to safe places. I put men on her. I did everything I knew how to do. but I was too confident. Marco, he used to be my friend before power and hatred twisted him into something unrecognizable, and he wanted to send a message. Julia became that message. I did not dare ask what had happened. I did not need to. The grief in his eyes told me enough that she died not because of her choices, but because of the arrogance and helplessness of a man who believed he could fight the world with his bare hands. Since that night, Lucas continued, his voice roughened, I have allowed no one near me except Dominic. I trust no one, and I do not let myself care for anyone. He looked directly at me, and for the first time nothing stood between us. Until I saw you in the parking garage. You looked at me not as a killer, but as someone who had no idea what had just happened. You were afraid, but you did not turn away. And I knew that if I let you go, I would lose another innocent life, simply because I failed to do enough. I did not know what to say, because empty words of comfort had no place here, so I simply reached for my cold cup of tea and let a question slip out of me almost without thought. Do you still love her? Lucas did not blink, did not turn away, and did not hide anything. Yes, he said, but not the kind of love that makes me want to go back, the kind that makes it impossible for me to let another person die because of me again. In that moment, I saw the real man behind the name Lucas Romano, a man carrying far more darkness than light, yet still holding on to some fragile thread of humanity to keep himself alive. And I realized I had stayed not only because I was afraid, but because, like him, I did not want to turn my back on someone trying to survive in a world they never chose. After that night, something shifted between Lucas and me. Not a rushed intimacy or hollow promises, but a different kind of quiet, deeper, gentler, as if we were both stepping cautiously across a fragile landscape where a single misstep could make everything crumble. Lucas did not speak of Julia again, and I did not ask. Yet from the look in his eyes, from the way he began leaving the door to his office slightly ajar instead of locked, from the way he started eating breakfast with me rather than having Dominic deliver food to my room, I understood he was lowering the walls around himself little by little. One morning, just as I finished making coffee and was about to pour my cup, Lucas stepped behind me, his hand brushing lightly against my wrist as he took the mug and poured it himself. It was a simple gesture, yet my heart skipped a beat. You like a lot of milk, right? He asked, his voice so soft I almost missed it. I only nodded, unable to look him in the eye. And in that brief instant I realized I was no longer afraid of him the way I once had been. The mornings drifted by in an oddly peaceful rhythm. I studied online in my room, Lucas worked in his own quiet space, and in the evenings, if he stayed home, we often watched the news or listened to soft music. One night I walked into the living room and found him sitting at the piano, the melody slow and melancholy, something so private it held me frozen at the doorway. He did not ask why I stood there, nor did he stop playing, and when the piece ended, he simply said, "That was the last song Julia ever heard me play." I offered nothing but a small nod because I knew I did not want to fill that silence with anything meaningless. Lucas began sharing little stories with me, not about his world, but about his childhood, about his mother, a stern Italian woman who baked fresh bread every Sunday morning, about the first time he was injured as a mischievous boy climbing fences, about learning French simply because his elementary school teacher had a gentle smile. He told these stories in a low, steady voice, not too intimate yet no longer distant. I listened and returned them with pieces of my own life, stories of Kansas, of my first job as a waitress at a small roadside diner, of my mother, who always believed I was capable of more than I ever dared imagine. We did not try to grow close, yet each quiet story slowly drew our two worlds toward one another. One evening, while studying medical notes, a sudden wave of fatigue washed over me. Lucas passed by, saw the way I pressed my hand to my forehead, touched his palm lightly to my skin, then disappeared into the kitchen without a word. 10 minutes later, he returned with a warm glass of honey water and a fever reducer. "You have a slight fever. Sleep. Do not study anymore." I looked at him, my vision blurring slightly, whether from illness or something else I could not tell. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded and stepped out, but the door did not close all the way. I lay there for a long time thinking about the way he had set the glass down gently, the way his eyes watched me without pulling back, and I realized that for the first time since the night in the parking garage, I felt safe. It was not because the place had cameras or guards, not because I was on a high floor behind 3 layers of locked doors, but because that man, Lucas Romano, was slowly becoming something different in my eyes. Not just the man who had taken a life on a rainy night, not just the one guarding a witness, but someone learning how to trust another person again. And I, though I did not dare say it aloud, was beginning to trust him as well. Slowly, little by little, yet more genuinely than anything I had felt in years. That day began like every other day in recent weeks, with a hot cup of coffee Lucas had already prepared and placed beside my laptop, a few brief questions from Dominic as I stepped out of my room, and the distant hum of the city drifting upward through the thick glass. I had almost grown accustomed to this new rhythm, to the unspoken rules of the penthouse, to the steady, quiet presence of Lucas. I had nearly forgotten that I once ran for my life, that I had been an unwilling witness dragged into a world not mine. But that fragile sense of peace did not last. Close to noon, Dominic knocked on my door, his expression far tenser than usual, stripped of its normal calm. "Grace, you need to come to the living room. Right now." I felt something shift immediately, an invisible current slipping through the air. I abandoned the lecture I had been watching and followed him, my heartbeat quickening when I saw Lucas standing by the dining table with his phone pressed to his ear, his face locked tight, his eyes so cold they sent a chill straight down my spine. He ended the call just as I approached and turned to me, his voice clipped to the point of dryness. "They know who you are, and they are looking for you." The words fell like a silent gunshot. I did not understand them at first. Everything slowed for a few seconds. Dominic picked up a remote and switched on the large screen in the living room. On it was security footage from the front of a convenience store a few blocks away. A man stood there holding a printed photograph. In that photograph was me. I was in my Bernie's uniform carrying a tray of pastries, my tired but polite smile unmistakable. "He is one of Marco's men," Lucas continued, "and he is asking about a girl named Grace Turner, waitress, brown hair, brown eyes, about 1 meter 65. I stumbled back, my hands tightening as a cold wave washed through me. How do they know my name? Lucas did not answer immediately. Dominic did. Maybe through former employees or the diner's security cameras. If Marco truly wants to find someone, he will find them. Lucas stepped toward me, not touching me, but his voice dropped to a heavy, low tone. "I thought we had more time, but we do not have as much as I hoped. And now you cannot be just a guest in this apartment. You need to learn how to survive." That day changed everything. Lucas instructed me to move to another room deep inside the penthouse, one without windows, lit only by artificial light, with its own ventilation system. He had someone bring a special phone with only 3 contacts programmed into it: Lucas, Dominic, and a man named Enzo whom I had never heard of. Dominic began teaching me how to recognize tracking devices, how to notice when someone was following me, how to defend myself in tight spaces. Each lesson was serious and demanding, and I was no longer the clueless girl who only knew how to carry a coffee tray. I was learning how to stay alive. Lucas was no longer as gentle as he had been during the peaceful nights before. He returned to his old quiet severity, his eyes always calculating, always gauging the unseen. I knew he was straining to hold everything under control, but for the first time I sensed that he, too, was afraid. Not afraid for himself, but for me. That night I sat alone in my new room, the white light turning everything emotionless. I stared at the old picture of myself on the screen and understood there was no path back. That girl, with her tired smile and eyes that had never seen blood, no longer existed. I was someone else now, someone being hunted, and behind all the layers of glass and steel, behind the security systems and the sleepless vigilance of Lucas Romano, I finally understood something more clearly than ever. The threat was close, and none of us, not even me, could afford to be weak anymore. I sat before the mirror in the windowless room, staring at myself and searching for any trace of the girl who once stood behind the counter at Bernie's, who used to smile politely at regular customers, who dreamed of someday wearing a white lab coat. But all I saw was a stranger with hollow eyes from sleepless nights, a faint red mark pressed into her chin from clenching her teeth unconsciously, and a gaze that always hovered on the edge of fear. How long had I been here? A week? 2 weeks? Maybe more? The days blending into a colorless sequence of self-defense lessons, meals delivered on schedule, and short-clipped conversations with Dominic or Lucas that felt more like instructions than concern. I knew they were protecting me. I knew the threat from Marco was real. But I also knew I could not live like this forever, not being allowed to go anywhere, not being allowed to call anyone, not being allowed to do anything without their approval. I was no longer a witness. I was a shadow kept in place because of a decision that had never been mine. That night after dinner, while Lucas was seated at his desk, I approached him. Without waiting for him to speak, I opened the conversation myself. I want to leave. Lucas lifted his head, his deep brown eyes looking at me without surprise but not with calm either. No. Only that single word, harsh and heavy as a hammer. But this time I did not back away. I am not asking your permission, Lucas. I am speaking about my right. You say you are not imprisoning me, but you are. You say I have choices, but I have never been allowed to choose anything. He set his pen down and slowly stood. Grace, do not confuse safety with captivity. I kept you alive until now, not to make you a prisoner. But if you walk out of here right now, you will die. Not because of me, but because of Marco. I swallowed hard, my throat scraping dry. I understand the danger, I understand the risk. But this is my life, my existence. And I cannot sit here any longer while someone else decides everything for me. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes shifting into something I could not distinguish as anger or worry. You think I do not want you free? You think I enjoy hiding you in this apartment? I do this because I cannot lose another person, Grace. You have no idea how ruthless Marco is. You cannot imagine what he is capable of. I tightened my fists and met his gaze. I am not Julia. He froze. The words struck like a blade, and I knew I had touched a wound that had never healed. I am not Julia, Lucas. I know you are trying to fix what you lost, trying to redeem yourself by protecting me. But I cannot be a replacement. I am Grace Turner. I have a mother waiting for me to call. I have dreams of my own. I have a life I built with every night shift, every daytime class, every short nap on a bus seat. And I will not let myself be swallowed by a war between you and Marco. Silence stretched so long I heard the rain tapping against the balcony. Lucas looked at me, something complex flickering in his eyes. No longer anger, no longer pride, only a deep exhaustion. He exhaled slowly. You want freedom? Fine. But you need to understand that freedom comes with risk. If you choose to leave, I will not stop you. But I will not be able to protect you the way I have. I nodded, saying nothing else. I knew I was taking a gamble, but for the first time I had power over my own voice, my own direction, even if that direction might be wrong. And when I turned and walked back to my room, I did not know if I was winning or losing, only that I had reclaimed a small part of myself, and sometimes that mattered more than safety. I did not leave the next day, nor the one after. Not because I was afraid, but because Lucas did not repeat his warning, and I still did not know where I would go once I stepped out that door. But from the night of our argument onward, something between us shifted into a strange quiet. No shared meals, no cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning, only brief messages passed through Dominic and the presence of a man trying to build distance. Lucas avoided me for nearly 3 days. I did not see him in the living room, did not hear the piano, did not catch even a glimpse of him in the hallway. The image of him standing motionless after I said, "I am not." Julia repeated itself in my mind, and part of me began to feel regret. I had pressed on a wound he was not ready to face, and though I did not want to be a replacement, I had never intended to turn myself into another cut. On the third night, the rain fell hard over the city, steady and unrelenting like the silence suspended between Lucas and me. I could not sleep. My mind crowded with questions without answers and feelings I had not yet learned how to name. I slipped on a thin sweater and stepped out of my room, intending to go to the balcony for a breath of air when I noticed a faint light coming from the music room. I walked toward it, hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open gently. Lucas sat there with his hands resting on the piano keys, though he was not playing, his expression distant as if he were holding on to something that was slipping away. He turned when he heard the door, not surprised, only watching me in silence. Neither of us spoke for a long time until I walked over and sat on the long bench beside him. "I did not mean to hurt you," I said, my voice rough. "I just did not know how to stay without losing myself." Lucas let out a slow sigh, placing his hand on the piano keys before murmuring, "I know. And I should not have tried to use you as a way to atone for the past." We sat in quiet, the sound of the rain outside blending with the breath of two people who had once been strangers, who had once been on opposite sides, who had once failed to understand each other. I touched a key lightly, letting a few random notes fall from my fingertips. Lucas smiled, the first smile I had seen from him in days. "You play?" he asked. I shook my head. "I only took a few lessons in school. I do not remember anything." He moved closer and placed his hand over mine. "Like this," he whispered, and I felt the warmth of his palm covering the back of my hand. He guided me into a simple chord, our fingers brushing, weaving together in a moment of stillness that felt strangely intimate. When the notes faded, I did not pull my hand away, and he did not let go. Lucas turned toward me, his face closer than it had ever been, the mask gone, the gaze of a man learning how to set down his fear. "Grace," he said, his voice low and honest, "I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight I want you to know that I trust you." I did not speak, only nodded, and when he leaned toward me, I did not turn away. Our first kiss was not hurried or reckless, but soft as the sound of rain falling on a rooftop. Enough to sweep away the doubts between us. Enough to confirm that here, in this moment, between two people who never should have crossed paths, something had finally aligned. Trust. We did not speak again. Neither of us slept that night. Not out of fear, but because we both understood that after everything, it was time to stop running. No longer savior and saved, no longer the guilty and the innocent, but two lonely souls finding each other in a city overflowing with shadows. And in that room, for the first time, I felt not only protected but allowed to stay. 3 days after that rain-soaked night, Lucas woke me with a light kiss on my forehead and a whisper soft as a breeze against my cheek. "You need to see what I have truly been trying to protect." I sat up, still uncertain about what he meant, but his eyes that morning were different, stripped of their usual tension and carrying something close to peace. He did not explain further, only handed me a light jacket and told me to bring a few essentials. Dominic was already waiting outside beside the familiar black SUV. I did not ask where we were going, nor did I feel any fear, because for the first time in weeks, I knew I was not being forced. I was being brought along as someone chosen to see beyond walls Lucas had never opened for anyone else. We left the center of the city, heading southwest through older neighborhoods and worn brick buildings touched by time. After more than 30 minutes, the car stopped before a large iron gate with no name and no sign marking it as anything important. But when the gate opened, I felt as if I had stepped into an entirely different world. Small wooden houses, neatly trimmed lawns, children playing by an old fountain, their laughter free of any trace of fear. I looked around in astonishment. "What is this?" I whispered. Lucas answered, "A place where people with nowhere else to go can find a home." He walked with me around the grounds, introducing each person by name, not by alias. A man who had once been a driver for a crew in Boston, now teaching children in a small classroom. A woman who had been a witness in a case involving the Italian mafia, now tending vegetables in a greenhouse and baking bread every morning. A 10-year-old boy who had seen his father killed, now living with a new family. Every person here carried a painful past, yet none wore fear in their eyes. They lived, they loved, and they were grateful. I stood silent for a long time, my heart tightening as I watched Lucas speak with an elderly Haitian man in fluent French, the two laughing together like old friends. No one called him a boss. No one flinched. They called him by his name, with trust in their eyes. I turned to him and asked quietly, "How long have you been doing this?" Lucas looked at me and answered slowly, "Almost 8 years. After Julia died, I could not bear the thought that her death was just another turn in the cycle. I began to save people, one at a time, families who wanted out of their old lives. But to protect them, I had to hold my position in a world I could not leave. This is the only place Marco has never found, and I wanted you to see it, so you would understand that not everything I do is stained in blood." We sat down on a wooden bench beneath a red maple tree, watching children ride their bicycles in looping circles. A little girl with curly hair ran over and handed Lucas a brightly colored plastic bracelet. "Keep this for good luck," she said before running off again. Lucas looked at the bracelet in his hand and smiled. I placed my hand over his. "Now I understand why you cannot walk away from all of this," I whispered. He tightened his fingers lightly around mine without saying a word. In the quiet, with only the soft rustle of falling leaves around us, I realized something unmistakable. Lucas was not only saving me from Marco, he was trying to save himself, piece by piece, through every person he protected, through every safe home he created, through every heart he helped steady back into a peaceful rhythm. And I, despite still carrying fear and doubt, began to see clearly that this place, filled with people who had once been victims but no longer lived like victims, could also be the place where I learned how to begin again, not because I was running, but because I was choosing to stay beside a man who was far from perfect, yet trying every day to do the right thing in a world too full of wrong. The visit to the community left a quiet echo in me for days. I began looking at Lucas differently, not simply as the man who once killed someone before my eyes, not as the man who guarded me out of obligation, but as someone with a deeper, more fragile heart than I had imagined, a heart still carrying wounds that refused to heal. I could feel a thread forming between us, invisible but real, drawing us closer through understanding rather than duty. One early autumn morning, Lucas knocked on my door earlier than usual. He was not wearing his tailored vest and polished shoes, but a simple gray sweater and jeans. He looked younger, softer, almost unsure. "I want to take you somewhere," he said, his voice quiet enough that it felt like hesitation. I did not ask where, only nodded. The drive was long and silent, filled only by soft music humming from the speakers. When the car turned onto a gravel path, I noticed the silence outside. No traffic, no tall buildings, only the rustling of old oak trees overhead. At the end of the road was a small, weathered cemetery hidden beneath drifting yellow leaves. Lucas stepped out first, then opened my door. He did not speak, merely motioned for me to follow. His footsteps were slow, as though he were marking with each step the years that had passed since that night. We stopped before a modest grave, a gray granite headstone without flowers or ornaments, only a name carved deeply into the stone, Julia Marcelli. Beneath it, a small line read, "For having once dared to believe in something good." Lucas stood still for a long time. Then he knelt, brushed away dried leaves, and placed a single sprig of dried lavender at the base of the stone. I did not dare break the silence. At last he rose, meeting my gaze without looking away. "I have never brought anyone here, not even Dominic. But today, I think you should know everything. Not because you need to know, but because I need to be forgiven." I clasped my hands and waited. Lucas looked at the grave and began to speak. "Julia did not die because of Marco. He did not kill her. I lied. I was the one who caused her death." His voice tightened, but he did not stop. "She wanted to leave everything behind. She begged me to let her go, to let her live a normal life. I had promised to protect her, and then I pulled her into a deal with Marco to secure safety for a few people in my network. Julia found out. She left, drove into the night. It was raining hard. The car slid off the road and struck a marker post. She died instantly, a stupid, ordinary death, but born from my selfishness and my lies. I stepped closer and laid a hand on his arm. "Lucas." He shook his head as if refusing comfort. "I have lived all these years knowing I was the reason. Everything I do, the community, protecting you, holding myself between two worlds, it is all a way to punish myself. I have never forgiven myself. And maybe I do not deserve forgiveness." The wind rose, carrying leaves across his shoulder. I lifted my gaze to him, my chest heavy. "None of us are perfect, Lucas. But what I see today is not a man drowning in guilt. It is a man trying to make things right with what remains of his life." Lucas lowered his head, his eyes reddened though no tears fell. He simply tightened his grip around my hand, a silent thank you. And in the quiet of that cemetery, beside the grave of the woman who once loved him, I understood something with absolute certainty. It is not redemption that defines a good man, but how he chooses to live after the ruin. And Lucas Romano, with all his tangled past and scarred heart, was living each day to prove he could still choose what was right, not only for Julia, but for people like me. We left the cemetery as the sunlight faded across the old oak branches. During the drive back, Lucas remained silent, and I sat still, my fingers turning the colorful plastic bracelet the little girl had once given him. No words were needed to understand that the moment at Julia's grave had closed a chapter inside him and opened another, a space where silence was no longer a barrier between us. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the penthouse changed. Dominic no longer checked on me so frequently. Lucas began allowing me to walk freely into his office, and I was even given my own computer, though it had no internet access. But that alone felt like a significant step. In the evenings, instead of sitting in silence, we began having longer conversations about the films I loved, about his childhood memories in southern Italy, about the first dish Julia ever cooked when they had just fallen in love. Lucas laughed more often, and I felt lighter each time I stepped onto the balcony and looked down at the city, no longer feeling trapped, but as though I were standing on a safe rooftop after surviving a storm. I even began drawing again, something I had abandoned long ago. One afternoon, Lucas walked past the kitchen and saw my sketchbook open on the counter, where I had drawn Dominic holding a coffee cup like some kind of fashion-forward bodyguard, and he looked at me, then burst out laughing, saying he looks much cooler here than he does in real life. We were able to laugh together, something I once thought would never be possible after seeing him pull a gun in that parking garage on our very first night. I slept better, no longer haunted by the sound of gunfire or Marco's cold, metallic eyes. I began to believe this might be the start of a new chapter, still confined in its own way, but real enough to feel like living. But moments of calm rarely last. Dominic was the first to sense something was wrong. One morning, he knocked on Lucas's door and handed him a small USB drive. Lucas plugged it into the large screen in his office, and as I stood beside him, my heartbeat quickened the moment I saw the footage. It was security camera video from a bar in northern Chicago. A tall man in a hooded jacket stood at the counter holding a photograph of me, this time cut from the diner's security footage from the night everything changed. He handed the image to the bartender and said something. The audio was muffled, but Dominic did not need sound to understand. Marco is intensifying the search. He has moved from the south side to the north. And worse, he is not hiding anymore. Lucas clenched his hand into a tight fist, and I watched his face change. The peace we had just begun to build shook beneath us like a house resting on soft sand. I tried to steady my voice as I asked, "What do we do now?" Lucas turned toward me, and for the first time in days his eyes regained the cold vigilance I had come to know in those early weeks. "We do not wait anymore." That afternoon, everything in the penthouse was inspected again. Dominic called in additional men, and Lucas held a closed-door meeting that lasted nearly 2 hours. I was not allowed to listen, but the heaviness inside me was impossible to push down. When Lucas finally stepped out, he came straight to me and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You were right, Grace. We cannot live like this forever. We cannot stay reactive." I looked at him, searching his eyes, and for the first time, instead of fear, I saw resolve. Marco might come. Things might become more dangerous than ever. But I no longer wanted to run, and Lucas had never looked more ready to face what was coming. The fragile calm we had tasted gave us a reason to fight, and if the choice was between hiding forever or confronting danger for the chance at real freedom, I knew we would choose the second, whatever the cost. The news of Marco appearing in northern Chicago had barely settled when something else forced all of us to change course. On the morning of the third day after Dominic brought the USB video to Lucas, he received an urgent call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was Maria, the girl who worked my alternate shift at Bernie's. Her voice trembled, nearly breaking apart. "Grace, a man came in asking for you. He had your picture. He asked the manager a lot of questions about you. Then he smashed the coffee pot, screamed in the middle of the diner, said, 'If you do not show yourself, someone else will pay for you.'" Lucas stood beside me as I listened, but I felt his whole body tighten like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Dominic immediately grabbed his phone, ordering all entrances to Bernie's locked and sending men to secure the place. Lucas said nothing. He simply walked to the wardrobe, changed into a sharp black suit, slipped a gun beneath his long coat, and stepped back out with a face carved from stone. Without looking at me, he said, "I am going to meet him." But I could not stand still. "You cannot walk into this alone. Marco wants to pull you into a trap." Lucas stopped, his eyes darker than the storm outside. "He does not need a trap. He wants to send a message, and I have already received it." We arrived at Bernie's while the diner was still open, though strangely empty. Maria sat behind the counter with red, swollen eyes, her hands trembling so badly as she wiped glasses that she shattered one. Lucas signaled Dominic to take her to the back, then walked straight toward the last booth in the corner where a man sat with his back turned, wearing a long brown coat, his gray leonine hair hanging in untamed waves, both hands lightly spinning a silver lighter. Marco. He did not need to turn to know Lucas was approaching. At last the esteemed Romano decides to show his face, he said, his voice low and even as if reciting an old play. Lucas did not sit, only stood tall like a carved monument. Why here? Marco slowly turned, his ashen eyes landing on me behind Lucas. He smiled faintly, because this is where it began. And I prefer ending things exactly where they started. I clenched my hands, trying to swallow the rising fear tightening my throat. Marco looked at me as though I were nothing more than an item he meant to bargain over. Grace Turner. I must admit, you have lasted longer than I expected. Perhaps because your protector is unusually attentive. Lucas stepped fully in front of me, his voice falling like cold steel onto stone. If you touch her, I will make you disappear before you reach for your gun. Marco laughed, a rough, hollow sound that echoed like the overture to a funeral. I do not need to touch her, Romano. I only need one statement. A single sentence in front of a jury, and everything you have built, your precious safe community, will collapse like a tower made of paper. I felt Lucas's entire body harden beside me, yet he did not draw his weapon, nor did he lash back. He only looked directly at Marco and said quietly, "So you are here to threaten me, or to tell me you have started to fear?" Marco's eyes narrowed, the smile evaporating. I am not threatening, I am warning. And this time, Romano, you will not have another woman to bury. He stood, left the silver lighter on the table like a silent message, and walked out with slow, deliberate steps, as if he had just set a timer on a bomb only he knew how to disarm. Lucas remained still, and I felt the tips of my fingers go numb. When we reached the car, he gripped my hand tightly without speaking. But I knew that from the moment Marco stepped into Bernie's, the line had been crossed. This was no longer the trouble of an accidental witness, no longer a gentle choice between leaving or staying. This was a declaration of war, and Lucas and I stood at its center. No more retreating, no more hiding, only facing what came, and surviving it. Lucas vanished the next morning. When I woke, everything in the penthouse looked the same, except for his absence. The coffee cup on the table was still faintly warm, and beside it lay a small note with 3 neat handwritten words. Do not worry. But I was already drowning in worry, in a fear so tight it made breathing difficult. Dominic avoided my eyes when I asked, saying only that Lucas needed to take care of something personal. But I understood better. After that confrontation at Bernie's, Lucas knew that staying defensive was no longer an option. His silence now was not avoidance, but preparation. Preparation for a confrontation he did not want me part of. Dominic received a call in the early afternoon. No one told me what was said, but minutes later he armed himself, called 2 more men, and left. I stood on the balcony watching the slow crawl of traffic below the fog-wrapped city, my chest twisting with the sense that something precious was slipping from my grasp. By nightfall, no one had returned, and I knew the battle had already begun. At 3 in the morning, the door opened. Lucas walked in without a single wound on him, yet his face was colder than I had ever seen, his eyes as dark as the night behind him. Dominic followed quietly, and I noticed blood smeared on the cuff of his coat. I rushed forward, my hands icy as I grabbed Lucas's arm to assure myself he was alive. He squeezed my hand gently, said nothing, only looked into me as if trying to convey something words could not hold. Finally, I whispered, "What did you do?" Lucas looked toward the window where the city lights flickered distantly and replied softly, "I went alone. No weapons, only one thing to say to Marco." I waited. my heartbeat stumbling. I told him that if he touched anyone from my community, or touched you, even as a name and a threat, then every secret I am holding will be released. The documents, the evidence, the recordings, all of it will go to the police, the press, to anyone who can bring down his entire empire in one night. And I was not bluffing. I swallowed hard, my palms tightening. And he believed you. Lucas nodded. Marco is not a fool. He knows I do not bluff. He knows I am the one man who can end everything if I choose to. I exhaled sharply, only to feel another realization settle over me. That means you have put everything at stake. Lucas sank into a chair, a trace of exhaustion flickering through his eyes for the first time since I met him. I cannot live in defense forever, Grace, and I cannot allow you to live like that either. Marco needs to understand that you are no longer a lonely target. You are someone I will protect in every way I can, even if I have to burn his world to ash. The room fell silent, and all I wanted was to wrap my arms around him, to tell him that I understood, that I knew he did not want violence or war, but I also knew there are battles that if we refuse to fight, we lose everything. I asked him, "And what about the evidence? The things you told him? Are they real?" Lucas looked at me, and for the first time that night he offered a faint smile. Not one of humor, but the smile of a man who has prepared himself for the worst for many years. "They have existed for years," he said. "Part of it is stored in Switzerland, the rest encrypted by Dominic. But you must understand, Grace, those files are a double-edged sword. They don't just incriminate Marco, they document my own past within the organization. Releasing them would destroy his empire, but it would also send me to prison for the rest of my life. That is why I never used them until he threatened you." I tightened my grip on his hand. Lucas had walked into his confrontation with Marco unarmed, yet he had carried something far stronger than any gun, a plan built on foresight and the willingness to sacrifice. I realized that although he had not drawn a weapon or fired a shot, he had fought tonight, and he had won, not through blood, but through the shrewd resolve of a man who once lost everything and would never again allow anyone to take what he holds dear. In the shadows of a city filled with traps, Lucas Romano had returned, empty-handed but holding real power for the first time. Life after the night Lucas came home seemed like it might settle again, yet I knew well that peace in this world was always a fragile concept. Lucas grew quieter, no longer leaving the penthouse as often. Dominic almost never looked away from his phone. I tried to act normal, continued my online nursing courses, even began cooking again as a way to reclaim a small sense of control. But deep down, I waited for what I knew was inevitable. And it arrived one early morning before sunlight could reach the wide glass windows of the penthouse. The landline phone in the living room rang. Not the cell phones, not the internal line, but the fixed landline, something that had never once sounded since the day I came here. Lucas was not home. Dominic was not home. I stood alone in the empty room, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted the receiver. No one spoke at first. Only slow breathing, as if the person on the other end was waiting to see if I dared to speak first. Then the voice came, low, steady, and familiar enough to freeze my spine. "Grace Turner. Finally, I get to hear your voice directly." I did not need to ask who it was. Marco. His tone was not loud, not overtly threatening, but it sent my heart racing as if unseen fingers were tightening around my throat. "I am not calling to intimidate you," he said, as though he could read my thoughts. "I am offering you an opportunity. One chance." I said nothing. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to scream for someone to hear me, but I stood still, listening as if pulled under a spell. "I can let you walk away from all of this, Grace. I know you are not a woman born to live in a world of blood and shadows. I know you still have family in Iowa, a mother who is ill, a younger sister in high school. You can go back to them. You can have a new life if... And he paused before finishing. If you agree not to testify, not to say anything, not to stand against me. Simple. You disappear. I leave everything untouched. My hand tightened around the receiver until my fingers turned pale. He knew. Too much. And he struck directly at my weakest points. My family, my freedom, my chance to begin again. And Lucas? I asked, my voice raw. Another small silence. Then he answered. He is a smart man. He knows the rules. If you walk away from this game, I do not need to touch him. He can handle himself. But if you go to court, then no one is safe, Grace. Not you. Not your mother. No one. I set the receiver down without another word. My heart pounded as if it would break through my ribs. I stood in the living room for several minutes, trying to breathe through air that felt thick as tar. When Lucas came home, I said nothing. Not then. We ate dinner and spoke about my classes and the weather as if the call had never happened. But that night I could not sleep. I stepped onto the balcony, the wind cold against my shoulders, and I looked at the city, a place I once thought would be nothing more than a temporary stop. I thought of my mother, of my younger sister who texted me every week, of the moments I had come close to dying, and of the look in Lucas's eyes when he told me he would protect me at any cost. For the first time in my life, I stood at a crossroads where neither path was easy. One side meant safety, returning home, giving up. The other meant facing danger, choosing to stay, not because I was forced to, but because my heart told me it was right. The next morning, I sought Lucas out myself. Before he could ask, I spoke plainly, my voice steadier than I expected. He called me Marco. He offered me a way out. Lucas rose to his feet, his eyes sharp with concern. Did you say anything? I shook my head. I did not need to say anything. I only need to decide. He looked at me as if bracing for a sentence he feared to hear. But I did not make him wait. I will testify, I said. I am not running. Not because of you. Because I have seen too much to turn away. And if he thinks he can scare me, then he should know I am no longer the girl who ran from a parking garage. Lucas said nothing. But in his eyes, I saw a feeling deeper than any thank you or any declaration of love. He knew that from this moment we could no longer retreat. And I knew that from this moment I was no longer just a witness. I was someone who had chosen to stand on the side of the light, even if the price was the rest of my life. That morning the city seemed wrapped in a thin veil of mist, a strange dreamlike haze that made every street look as if it were leading toward an unfamiliar place. I wore a long gray coat, my hair pulled back tight, no makeup, no jewelry, carrying with me only one invisible shield, the choice I had made for myself. Lucas took me to the federal building in the city center. It was not a grand courtroom filled with spectators, nor the dark parking garage where everything began. Instead, we were led into a stark, brightly lit conference room within the U.S. Attorney's office. Dominic drove, and Lucas sat beside me, his hand resting over mine the entire way. No one spoke, but his eyes said everything. He could not do this for me, but he would not let me face it alone, not even for a heartbeat. When we entered, a small group of investigators were already waiting, along with a stenographer and the best defense lawyer Lucas had hired. They all remained silent at first. The room was heavy with tension, save for the low hum of the air conditioning and the rapid, rhythmic typing of the stenographer recording the preliminary details. Lucas sat in the corner, his gaze steady on me, the only anchor in a sea of sharp legal questions. I did not need to physically reenact the scene. I simply closed my eyes and let the memory surface. I described every detail: the flickering yellow light of the garage, the sharp tone of Marco's voice, the movement of Lucas, the shock, the deafening crack of the gun, and the terror that clawed at me when Lucas's eyes met mine for the first time. Every word I spoke was not just testimony, but a fragment of a memory that had haunted me for months. I did not avoid anything, nor did I embellish. I told the truth every breath, every reaction, every second I thought I was going to die. When the lead investigator asked whether I was certain that Lucas Romano had acted in self-defense, I looked straight into his eyes. I am certain. The man drew his gun first. Lucas reacted to survive. And if he had not, the one dead that night might have been me. They asked nothing else. Notes were signed, the recording stored in the case file. The testimony ended faster than I expected, but the feeling afterward was not relief. It was release. As we left the glass-walled building, I took a deep breath of the free air. I looked back at the revolving doors where I had left my testimony, and realized I had also left my fear behind. It was the place where I had finally stopped running. On the way back, Lucas held my hand tighter, and Dominic, as always, said nothing. Though I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, the eyes of a man who knew the storm had passed, but whose echoes would linger for a long time. When we returned to the penthouse, I went straight to the bathroom, turned on the hot water, and stood beneath it until my legs nearly gave out. I did not cry. I did not shake. I only felt a strange emptiness, as if I had left a part of my former self behind in that cold concrete garage. Lucas waited for me in the living room, and when I stepped out with my hair still damp, he pulled me into his arms and held me so tightly I felt I might dissolve into his breath. "It is done," he whispered against my ear, part comfort, part confirmation. I nodded, though I knew well that endings are never that simple. There was still more ahead. But at least today, I had not run. I had stood, spoken, chosen my own path. And whatever came next, I would not be a victim again. I was Grace Turner, a witness, a survivor, and a woman who had stepped out of the shadows on her own 2 feet. That evening, the penthouse lights remained dim, only the soft amber glow of a table lamp casting long, quiet shadows of Lucas across the wall, like the final notes of a fading symphony. I walked out after drying my hair, wearing a soft sweater, my bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. Lucas stood by the glass wall with a glass of red wine, staring down at the night city where windows glimmered like tiny, patient stars. He did not turn when I approached, but his voice rose low and slow, as though he had held these words inside him for many long nights. "Grace, do you know what frightens me most?" I stood beside him without answering. "It is not Marco. It is not losing the community or the network I built. What frightens me is the day you leave, the day you walk away from this place, from my life, and I cannot do anything to keep you." I turned toward him, my heart tightening. "Lucas." But he raised a hand, as if to steady words he had not finished speaking. "I never thought I would ever say this, because I never believed I deserved anything like love. But each day, from the moment you stepped into my life, even in the strangest, most broken way, I have changed. I see the world differently. I see myself differently. And that terrifies me, because if the day comes when you leave, then that part of me leaves with you." He turned toward me then, his dark brown eyes deep and trembling, and for the first time I saw him fragile, exposed in a way I had never imagined a man like him could be. "I love you, Grace. I do not need you to say it back. I just need you to know." There was no pause long enough for me to analyze what I felt in that moment, because the truth was, I had known long before he ever said the words. I had known on the night he led me out of the parking garage without harming me. I had known in the way he watched me each time I smiled or fell silent. and I had known most clearly from my own heart, the part of me that had stopped belonging only to myself long ago. I moved closer, placed my hand on his chest where his heartbeat was racing as though he had been waiting for something he did not dare hope for. "Lucas Romano," I whispered, "I am not going anywhere." He looked at me, half disbelieving, half afraid this was only a fleeting emotional moment. But I took his hand and guided him to the sofa where we sat side by side without saying anything more. We did not need words. My presence beside him was the answer to everything. That night, Lucas did not leave my side for even a single step. He did not kiss me like in a fairy tale, did not promise me anything romantic or grand. We simply sat there, hand in hand, beneath the dim light and the soft hum of jazz drifting from the small speaker in the corner. A fragile piece, hard-earned, made even more precious because of how difficult it had been to reach it. I had chosen to stay, not out of debt, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because I loved him. A love born from trust, from what we had survived together, from the way he looked at me as though I were the one steady thing left in his world. And I knew that whatever waited ahead, this moment, this love, was real. And it was something I had never had, never dared to believe in, until I met him. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye, and as summer settled against the tall glass windows of the city, I realized my life had truly turned to a new chapter. No more restless sleep fearing a knock on the door in the night. No more panic each time I stepped into a parking garage or jumped at some small sound. Life had not returned to what it was before, but had eased into a new rhythm, slower, more deliberate. Lucas was still Lucas, but the shadowed hardness he once carried had softened. He woke early with me, drove me to class, waited in the car or at a nearby cafe with his laptop and phone, running his work from afar. Dominic still appeared from time to time, a quiet shadow watching over things. Yet now he sometimes smiled and shared old stories about Lucas that made me laugh, while Lucas only shook his head and pretended not to hear. My graduation ceremony was held in a small auditorium on the campus of the Community Health School on the west side of Chicago. I wore a blue gown, a graduation cap, holding the diploma I once believed I would never reach. When my name was called, I walked across the stage to the applause of strangers, but I searched for only one pair of eyes in that crowded room. Lucas stood in the back row, not drawing attention, not making a sound, only watching me with a look filled with quiet pride. He did not have to say anything. I knew that every step I took up that stage was built on all the times he had pulled me back from the edge, all the sleepless nights he helped me study, and most of all, the unconditional patience he offered me even when I could not believe in myself. When the ceremony ended, I walked to him still holding my diploma, and he wrapped his arms around me in the middle of the busy courtyard. For the first time since everything began, I cried, but not from fear or pain. I cried because for the first time I felt truly proud of myself. He leaned down and whispered into my ear, his voice soft as wind brushing past my cheek. "You did it, and I never doubted that you would." We walked together through the small park near the school, hand in hand like any ordinary couple, though I knew well that nothing about our love was ordinary. It had been built from fear, loss, battles, and the moments we had nearly lost each other. But that was what made it strong and mature. Not a hurried passion, not a fragile infatuation that evaporates with the morning sun, but a slow, steady warmth, like a fire burning deep in a winter hearth. Lucas still sometimes fell into long silences before sharing something personal, but I no longer saw those silences as distance. Instead, I cherished each time he opened his heart, telling me about Julia, about the years he spent walking the line between good and evil, and about how he eventually learned that protecting someone does not always mean keeping them at arm's length. Sometimes protection is letting them choose. And he chose to let me choose my own path. 3 months were not enough to heal every scar, but they were enough for me to know that I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a woman who had walked through the darkness and chosen to stay, not only to stay beside Lucas, but to stay true to myself. And when I looked into those familiar dark brown eyes, I knew that whatever the future carried toward us, we would face it together, not as fugitives, but as two people moving forward, hand in hand, steady, quietly strong. And love was no longer a luxury, but a choice we willingly repeated every single day. On a crisp autumn morning, I sat by the window of our new apartment holding a warm cup of coffee, watching golden leaves drift softly in the wind. 3 months after graduation, I began my new job at a community health center in northern Chicago, not far enough to keep Lucas from driving me each day, yet close enough for me to feel I had a life of my own, something independent, something that belonged solely to me. There were nights when I still woke in cold sweat as old memories surfaced without warning, but when I turned and saw Lucas beside me, breathing evenly, his arm resting lightly around my waist in that instinctive protective way, I knew I was no longer alone. Life was not always easy. There were days I came home exhausted from work, and there were times Lucas left early or returned late because of duties he could not share. But through it all, the reason I knew I had been right to stay was not guilt, not gratitude for being saved, but the simple truth that I had chosen to love him with my whole heart. That choice did not come from pity or fear, but from respect. From the belief that this man who once lived in shadows and carried the grief of someone who had lost everything was trying each day to become something better for himself and for us. Lucas never asked how long I planned to stay. He never set conditions or bound me with promises. Yet it was precisely that freedom that made me want to stay more than anything. I knew that if one day I chose to leave, he would not stop me. But I also knew I would not leave. Because now love was no longer a destination, but a journey we walked together with each morning we woke, each dinner we shared, each quiet moment when we sat side by side watching the city light up below. My story is not a fairy tale, not a miracle or a perfect happy ending, but it is real. And what truly matters is not how many storms you have endured, but who held your hand when you were most fragile, and who you became after all of it. I had once been just an ordinary girl working night shifts at a diner, too afraid to dream of anything larger. Now I am a woman who understands her own worth, who knows that love is not unconditional sacrifice or sweet control, but a daily choice. A sense of deep safety that comes from being seen, understood, and loved for who you truly are. Thank you for staying with this story until its final moment. If it touched something in your heart, please support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing the video so we can bring more moving and meaningful stories to others. And where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below and share your honest thoughts about the journey of Grace and Lucas. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between safety and love? What would you have done if you were in Grace's place? We truly hope to read the words that come from your heart. Wishing all of you watching this video good health, a peaceful life filled with daily joys, and the strength to always find your own light, no matter where you are along the path of your life. Goodbye, and see you again in our next videos. Thank you for staying until the end.